Hello. I am just getting things set up here really quick, and then we can get started. Let me just grab this and notify folks of office hours. And then we can get started. Okay, so for those of you who have never participated in office hours before, you're in for a real treat. So let me share my screen here real quick, and we can explain what is going on. So office hours is your chance to talk with me and ask any question that you want for the space of an hour. I do this twice a week, and it's a good time, lots of information and knowledge shared in here. So enjoy. It's not very well indexed. Unfortunately, I'm not sure how to not spend a million hours on that and still have it well indexed. So that's just the way that it is. Yeah, so it's primarily it primarily works through my Discord. So if people on the Zoom call do have questions, and that's what I prefer actually. But if nobody on the Zoom call has questions, then I'll just go through the office hours chat on my Discord and answer questions there until we run out of questions. And that's just how that kind of works. I do it twice a week on Mondays and Thursdays, and it's a good time. So actually, with that in mind, I also do have cancellations. So, of course, I'm not going to be doing this a week from today because that is Thanksgiving holiday in the United States, and I want to spend that day with my family. So, with that, does anybody in the Zoom call have questions that they want to ask as we get started? If not, then this actually might be pretty short because I don't recall any questions in Discord, but we'll scroll back and let's see if we can find any in here. I remember answering that. And that's where I said goodbye. This is terribly creepy. We talked about this. Okay, here we go. So Matt asked a question. And let's get this read here really quick. Oh, yes. And we answered it, and he found the answer in a previous office hours. Like I said, lots of information shared. Okay. Yep. Yeah, we literally have no questions. So this is the first time ever. So yeah, that's interesting.
I have one.
Okay, great. So, while you're asking, I'm just gonna, or before you ask, I'm just gonna share on Twitter really quick. I'm doing office hours right. Okay. Now join us here to on Discord. To ask me anything. Smiley face. Okay, cool. Then we'll see if we get some more people. I don't actually care all that much. I have plenty of things that I can do. All right, Yago, you've got a code sandbox. Sweet.
Yeah. So my question is there any real difference between like use layout effect or use effect and use imperative handle for me to like, I can accomplish the same thing with both? Is there any like anything special about use imperative handle that I can do with use layout effect? Because they both run in the same render time, like in the hook flow, in the order that you write them. So.
Oh, yeah. Did you ask about this earlier? I feel like I remember seeing a question about this.
I asked like a few weeks ago.
Yeah, okay. So actually, when I teach use imperative handle, let's see, that's actually advanced React hooks. In here, have you watched? You've already watched this, right? You're
Yeah,
you've gone through this. If I remember correctly, anytime I gave this as a workshop, and I'm pretty sure that's how I recorded it, the way that I teach it is I actually implement use imperative handle with use layout effect. Do you remember me doing that?
Oh yeah, so it's just semantics then.
Yeah, it's basically So here, let's take a look at what you've got. You've got these two refs that you're, or these two components, you're passing refs to it, and then you just call .current on it. And then in the, here's the imperative version where we say use imperative handle, here's my ref, and here's the thing that I want attached to my ref. It's actually just going to be the focus function. And then here, I'm going to use layout effect and set my ref to the focus function. So those are basically exactly the same. If you dive into the source code for React, I have done this in the past. If I remember right, that's basically what it does, is it's using a layout effect. I'm pretty sure that's right. In any case, like it is, the semantics are exactly the same. So all that use imperative handle is doing for you is it's hiding the implementation detail of assigning .current to whatever it is that you're returning from this function. So these two are basically identical. So it comes down to what do you dislike the least? And I would prefer, in this situation, I would prefer use imperative handle over use layout effect with assigning ref, just because it's built in, and I'm guessing that like if there were ever any changes they wanted to make or anything, it would just be easier to go or to not go against the grain. So
yeah, makes sense. Another thing that I had, and it's just some people have the impression that you can only pass like a object, you can only return an object with the things that you want for imperative handle, and that's one of the things that I try to try here. Just return, yeah, just return something that isn't necessarily
yeah.
object.
So you return a function. Yeah, you could return a number or string or whatever. Yeah, that's a good point. And this is actually why in the same workshop, when we start with use reducer, I start out by storing the number itself as the state for the reducer rather than an object, because lots of people have the same misconception about use reducer that you have to use an object to store an objective state, but that's not at all the case. So yeah, it's kind of fun, the things that you can do when you understand what the underlying things are. So it's cool.
Thank you.
Cool. Anyone else on the Zoom call have a question for office hours? If not, then this is going to be a pretty short office hours. I've never had this before, which is kind of fun.
Hey, Kent, I have a question.
Yeah, what's up?
I have a gist, because
Nice.
this is very hard to explain without code.
Yeah, sure.
So I ran into this, in fact, I run into this situation a lot where I like have a hook that depends on some data that I need to exist. And the thing that I do is I end up like making like a new, like another like internal component and like conditionally rendering that. So I guess my question is like, if you look at this code, like, is there anything you would do different? Like maybe the naming or just maybe changing how the hooks work or any just
Oh,
like general
right.
opinions?
Yeah. Yeah, because you can't have conditional stuff. So yes, this is definitely a problem to be addressed. Well, it's probably an unaddressable problem with hooks, the way that they're designed. Like this will never change. So it is a problem. So there are a couple of ways to solve this problem. I'm guessing that you have some control over this this hook. You're not just using a library. Is that
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. So what React Query does, and I think this is the best solution for this, is they have an enabled option. Yeah, right here, where you just set it to false and it just does nothing. So that would basically be the solution. Is here you could just say your use some query and then have an option for enabled is equal to is non-empty user.posts, and that would solve the problem. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not great.
Yeah. Well, like let's say like it wasn't a query hook. Let's say it was just a hook that I just didn't want to call at all for whatever reason.
Yeah. So I've actually had this thought experiment myself, and So let's run through the hooks. With Xstate, who cares if you call it? No big deal, right?
Yeah.
That's whatever. Use reducer is the same. Use ref is also the same. Who cares? Use effect and use layout effect. Those two, those are special, and for those, that's where you need this enabled feature. And that's just like the first thing that your use effect does is if not enabled, just return. It's just an early return. And so again, not great, but it is a solution. Let's see, what else is there? You like probably don't have too many use or situations where you're using use imperative handle, but even that, like, who cares? Just run it anyway. Yeah, so I can't really think of any, use context, who cares? I guess use context, you could say, well, I mean, there's performance and stuff, and that I got a whole bunch of stuff on Epic React about how to optimize that for performance. So yeah, I don't know. I can't think of any situations where I have a hook and I just don't want it to run, unless it's a third-party hook, which doesn't have this use enabled or this enabled functionality, in which case then your options are two: either contribute back to it and add the enabled functionality, or do exactly what you're doing here. I wouldn't be able to advise any differently.
So I guess the quote unquote solution is to make the hooks themselves able to be conditional.
Yeah, to make it so that you can disable whatever behavior you don't want to have happen.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess I can just leave this code as is. Like, what I have is obviously simplified, but yeah, I guess I'll keep that in mind.
This would be my second option, and it's not a bad one. It's not a great one, but yeah, I mean, there's only so much that you can do when the hook is trying to do things like with incomplete data or something like that, right?
Right.
So what I would another thing to consider is maybe the hook should just be smart enough to know that if you don't pass it an ID here, it should just not do anything. I've had that. In fact, let's see, it's React hooks. On our last exercise of React hooks, where we talk about HTTP requests, I wish it was easy to go to the code for this, so I didn't have to pull it up locally. So we'll just go to the edit, and then exercise 06. No, let's do the final. So yeah, in here, if there's no Pokemon name given, well, this is for a component, but I think we eventually pull this out into a separate hook. But anyway, if most of the time, it's not a bad idea for a custom hook to just say, oh, I don't have all the information I need, let's just exit early. So it seems like a pretty reasonable thing to expect your hook builder to do, is just say, hey, if I haven't provided a post ID, then don't try and go get a post because I haven't given that ID anyway. And so for if it's designed in that way, you don't need to have a enabled disabled. You just don't pass the requisite information if you don't want it to get called. So.
Okay, that makes sense. And like my actual case, it looks like I'm looking at the code right now. It's like it was more like that I wanted to like have a context in which I could guarantee that the ID, that the data that I needed was there because I'm using TypeScript. So I wanted like to like say like this entire chunk of code, it's defined, as opposed to having to do like 5 different undefined checks and different effects or in render and stuff like that.
Yeah, TypeScript does so much for us, and at the same time, it's the worst.
Yeah, it kind of just morphs the way I think. I mean, obviously it's worth having, but
right, yeah. Often I hear people say that if you have to do a lot of weird things to make TypeScript work, then maybe you're doing it wrong. Like you shouldn't do those weird things that you're doing. I think that's maybe sometimes true, but I don't think that's always true.
Yeah, I think I follow that sentiment pretty closely. Like instead of like changing my React component returns to fragment, I'll just do as any. Like I don't want to have to do weird stuff that I wouldn't normally do in JS, more or less.
Yeah.
I think it's case by case, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It's case by case. There's nuance. So anyway, fun times.
That's all I had for you.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for the question.
I actually have another one.
Great.
It's okay. So I think this component, like the first one isn't as bad. The second one, I know the last one is really bad because you're creating a new type on render. The second one is just a function. Is it as bad? It like, do you destroy everything that's under that tree?
No, you don't. Yeah, so this is actually kind of a fun example. And actually, when I'm preparing to teach people how, no, it's in the React Hooks workshop when we do the tic-tac-toe. I show people how to do this. So this is actually like, this is a legit thing. There are reasons to do this. I don't find them very often, but there are reasons to do things this way. But yeah, I'll just explain for the benefit of everybody why this is so bad really quick, and then why neither of these suffer from the same thing. So why doing this is bad is because when React is rendering, it sees this and it says, oh, you're trying to create a component, and here's your template for creating that component. So I'm going to make an instance of this component, and I'll associate all the hooks that it's using and everything to this instance that I'm holding on to in memory. I'm not exactly sure how that's implemented, but we don't get an instance to the component. But as far as React is concerned, there's some mechanism to attach all these hooks to. And then there's the concept of mounting and unmounting for that component. So what happens when you're re-rendering is, let's say that I need to be able to type something. So let's say that you added some logic where you'd say if thing, then do this, otherwise do whatever. Okay, so now if that thing actually were to change, then React needs to take this and get rid of it and then create a new version of this whatever thing. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. Like if we rendered UI, but now we're going to render whatever, then we need to get rid of UI and now render whatever. So there's going to be an unmounting process. The reason that this is not great, the reason you want to avoid doing, and like I shouldn't just say avoid doing, the reason you should never do this. I honestly can't think of a single situation where you'd want to do just this. I can think of situations where you might want to do something like this, but not just that. You have to do a couple optimizations. But yeah, so the reason that you don't want to do this is because as far as React is concerned, when this component re-renders, it's going to create a brand new function called UI. So you'll have the old function UI, you'll have the new function UI. And even if you're not doing some conditional rendering things and you're just saying, hey, let's render this UI again, you're still, as far as React knows, these are two totally different functions. And so it's basically what we had before, where it's like, oh, let's get rid of the old one and let's put the new one on. That means that you're going to unmount and remount those functions. Yes, exactly like Iago is saying here. We're going to create element with UI. That's what this effectively is saying. And that UI is different on every render. And so that's why we get the unmount and remount. And this has a lot of implications from like the use effects that are in there to the state that is being stored within that UI element, all of that. The reason that this doesn't matter right here is because we're not passing this to react.create element. We're actually just calling a function and taking the return value and interpolating it into this position. And so for all intents and purposes, these two are actually identical as far as React is concerned. React doesn't even know that you've made a function called UI and that you're calling it here. In fact, this is also, as far as React is concerned, this is also identical. So all three of these right here are exactly the same as far as React knows. And yeah, hopefully that makes sense for folks. Does that answer your question, Iago?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Okay, cool. Horacio's got a question that I must have missed. Sorry. Oh, yes, I remember seeing this. Right. You want to test a particular page. Is it? Oh, right. Yeah. So better to render the whole app and change routes as the code in the bookshelf, or just render the page you want to test. So let's take a look at the bookshelf, or let's see, book screen. Yeah, there's my test right here. And test utils. This is also, what's the difference? Yeah, there. Relevant here. Okay, so the UI that we're testing here is this screen right here. So we want to test to make sure that I can say this is completed and this has a ranking and this is an amazing book. I want to be able to test all of that functionality. I want to make sure that the start and finish date show up, all of that stuff. And so this is a component, and I could just render this component by itself. The problem is that it requires a couple providers for it to work properly. So in particular, it mostly requires the user auth provider to be able to make authenticated requests, and it requires the React query provider. Now, it doesn't technically require the React query provider because there are some defaults, even if you don't render that provider. But I want the configuration of React Query in my app to be the same as in my tests. And so I'm going to need the React Query provider. And so the question becomes, okay, so I'm going to, given that I have to render this within all these providers, and if I had a link in here too, I'd also need the router. So given that I need to render this component with all the providers, I can do one of two things. I can either render this component inside of like inside of those providers individually, or I can just render my whole app and make the URL such that I'll be on this page. So those are your two options. And I would suggest that like typically it probably is going to take just as much work, if not more, to make a copy of all of your providers and then render the component within those providers as it would to just render your whole app and then make sure that you're on the right page. Now that may or may not be true. Like maybe you've got a lot of stuff on this side that you don't want to bother with rendering or something, like maybe there's a bunch of stuff. And so like there's nuance to this and it's going to be different in every case. But what I would suggest is that when this component is used, it is going to be used in the context of the whole application. And so your default should be, I want my tests to do the same thing that my production is doing. And that means rendering the whole app. Now, there are a lot of people listening who don't understand or don't know me and don't know that I realize that there's nuance and there are situations where unit tests are valuable and everything. So please, I believe in unit tests, but most, and in fact, I'll just share this right here. So I've got this blog post, write tests, and I'll just paste this right here. So don't think that I'm a heretic and I just hate unit tests, but I think that most of our tests should be integration. We should try to get things as close to where the actual user, like the actual user's experience is as possible. And so given that, if we can manage just rendering our whole app on the screen that we're trying to test, then that's best. If you can't, then what you'll need to do is like take all of your providers that you need and create a wrapper. And that's actually sort of what I do in my test utils for this workshop, sort of. So I've got actually the way that I kind of do, yeah, so let me explain how the bookshelf app is structured as far as a test is concerned. What I actually do in the bookshelf app is I render the specific component that I want to test with the same app providers that my app is being rendered with. So let me explain how this works. If I go, oh, that's not going to work. So we'll go to the source directory context index. And I'm going to also want to go to the source directory index right here. So this is the way that the app is rendered. Here we're rendering these app providers, and then we render our app, and then that renders the authenticated or unauthenticated side of the app. So these app providers are what I'm using in my application. All my global providers are being rendered inside of here. So I've got my React query config provider, the router, and then the auth provider. And then I render whatever the children are. And so I take advantage of this fact because I do want to render these same providers that are rendered in production. So I take advantage of this fact in my utils right here, where I import those app providers and then use that as my wrapper for whatever UI I'm providing. So in the bookshelf tests, what I'm actually doing is I'm rendering the full app router and everything, like the router, the authentication provider, all the regular stuff that's in my app. I'm not configuring it in any special way. I'm just exactly the way it is in production. I'm going to render it that way in my tests. But then I'm only rendering the part of the UI that I actually, or the screen that I actually care about. And so this ends up working out pretty well for me. So I'm not rendering the full app in this context. So when I'm running these integration tests, I'm not rendering like the left nav or the login, logout, anything. I'm just rendering this part, this book screen. And that works out pretty well for me. If I wanted to just render the whole app, then I actually do have some other tests in the Bookshelf app for each one of these. Let's see, we could probably go with this one. For each one of these exercises, if you take a look at the way that I verify the exercise is good, I actually only have one test. It's an integration test. And this one, it does a bunch of setup to get things ready. It even creates our root in the document. And then I just require, after all the setup is ready, I just require the module that mounts my application. It's kind of cool, actually. And so once all the global environment is set up, then I just say, hey, run this file. And it does exactly what my app does in production. And because I've got well, in this case, I actually don't care about the route that I'm on. I just, yeah, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, it doesn't matter what route I'm on. I just say, hey, just render the thing. And then I proceed to go log in as a user and whatever. So this is kind of like two different ways to do this. This only works because I only have one test in here. I probably should like reset modules between every test, but I only have one test, so I didn't bother with that. But that's another thing that you could do is just like, hey, just render the index. But if you didn't want to go that far, then you could take like I'm showing you a whole spectrum of different things that you can do and letting you decide, because every situation is different. How people feel differently comfortable about different things. But you know, the interesting thing about this is we're not using React testing libraries render. We're just requiring the file, and that is going to call React DOM.render, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, an alternative to this would be to import the app in your test and import the app providers. And then like I'm doing in here, you would just update the URL to be whatever route you're trying to render to. And then you'd render the app and the app providers. So you could do it that way too. One other thing, it just occurred to me. I just remembered. I actually lied. When I told you that in my test, I'm only rendering the book screen. I just remembered that in my book screen test, in my custom render here, I'm taking whatever UI you give me and I'm rendering that in my app providers. And so that is true. And I can render like a specific component within the app providers. But what I'm actually doing when I call this render function for my book screen is I actually render the whole app. So that's what, that's like, I was pretty sure that's what I was doing. And I was confused when I saw this. I'm like, oh, I'm not actually rendering the app, but I'm rendering the whole app, and it works out just fine. It works out really well. And what's nice about this is I get some confidence that not only does the book screen work and everything, you know, I can type in here and I can add it to my reading list and mark it as read or whatever. Not only does that all work, but also I know that when the user navigates to this particular route /book/book ID, they will see the book screen. So you don't get that if you're just unit testing the specific component. Like you have to wait until end-to-end test to get that confidence, which you can get it from that, and that's fine. But it's just an extra piece of confidence at a lower level for by rendering the full app. So it's not exactly probably the cut and dry solution that you might be hoping for, but that's what it is. And I just realized I pasted this in the wrong channel, so I'm going to paste that in here now. Okay, cool. Hopefully that was helpful, Horacio.
Hey, I'm here.
Yeah. Hey.
Thanks for the answer. Also, like, not related to that, but I remember you mentioned, like, I don't know if it was today or yesterday, you did a live stream about testing, and also you were getting like a little annoyed about people wrapping user event in act and async await. But I missed the first part, and I don't remember. I'm finding myself doing that sometimes to get to avoid the error. So sorry if you can repeat a little bit again that, if you don't mind.
Let me think of how to.
Let me paste like one of the things that I'm doing.
Yeah, that might help a lot, actually.
Well, it's just the line async await and then async act, like that thing, which is kind of weird and awkward. But I don't know if that's okay. That's wrong.
Yeah, it's wrong, and I'll show you why what you're doing actually makes the warning go away, but is the wrong way to do that. So
yeah, I'm sorry. I know you mentioned this like 100 times.
No, you're good. Like, this is such a common question. I should probably address this specific thing in my ACT blog post, because I share it with people and they're like, I still don't get it. So let me find we'll just do this in our React Fundamentals workshop. Any place will do. Let me get my streaming settings turned on in here as well. Okay, cool. So if we do a test, here we'll just do await.js. And I'm gonna make a, we'll make our counter component right here. We'll import React and we'll make a test that, my thing works. And then we'll import render and screen from testing library React and user event from testing library user event. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to render the counter. And then we're going to user event click on screen get by text 0. And then we can expect screen get by text 1 to be in the document, because now it should be 1, so that should work. So this, I expect this to pass. I don't think this will have any trouble. And so the question becomes, I don't know why this is taking so long. Could be because I'm streaming. So yeah, what if we were to change this and have it be in a set timeout? So it's async now. It happens after 10 milliseconds. Okay, so now this is going to fail, and it's going to like halt all execution. But if I get rid of this, actually, man, this is where things get kind of annoying. So this is, let's see. Well, let's just do this just to demonstrate what could happen if, let's just imagine that we did this thing, and now our test is going to continue to run. We're going to continue to do more things, just so we can demonstrate what could happen in this situation. So we're going to await a new promise, resolve set timeout that will resolve after 50 milliseconds. Okay, so now we're going to get an act warning. And the reason that we're getting this act warning is because React is saying, hey, you're in a test environment, and as I was running through some of your code, I noticed that you performed a state update, and that's fine. I'll re-render it and everything. But because that state update happened outside of my call stack, I don't know when I should run all of your use effects. So here, let's add a React use effect, console log count. Okay, so then we get a count of 0, and then we get a count of 1. So eventually React is just gonna be like, okay, I'll just flush everything. And this is most likely happening when we tell React to unmount the component. So React testing libraries, at the end of every test, it's gonna say, okay, we've mounted a bunch of components, let's just get them all unmounted. And that gives you confidence that if you have something going on in here that says throw new error blah, or you say probably more common foo blah, whatever, you try to call something on here, because we're automatically unmounting for you, we'll catch stuff like this, and that's why we do that. So when we do this automatic unmounting, then React is like, oh, okay, before I unmount, I'm going to flush all the use effects, and that's why we get this 1 logged right here. But if I wanted to say, hey, let's console log, yeah, we'll just add a console log right here, then I'm thinking that this here, yeah, the timing is all going to be different, so that won't make sense. But basically, React, when you call a set count outside of React's call stack, React is like, you're going to update the state, and that's fine. I'll trigger a re-render, but I'm just not sure when to flush all of these use effects. And if I don't flush those use effects, then you could be interacting with a state of the world that's out of sync with the state of your application. And that's probably like, that's not what your user is going to experience. Your user is going to see that like the browser's updated and all of the side effects have happened, whatever those side effects may be. And so when you call when you trigger a render outside of React's call stack, you need to also say, hey, React, I am done making all of my updates. You can now flush all of your side effects so that I can continue on with my test. That's what the act warning is all about. And that's what my blog post tries to explain, is that like, we just need to tell React that we're done making state updates and it can go ahead and flush those. And so like, we can solve this. Actually, I'm pretty sure this will work. If we do act, then we return the promise. I think this will get rid of our warning. Yeah. So we're saying, hey, just I'm going to be doing a bunch of stuff, but when this promise resolves, then you can flush. That's basically what's happening there. But nobody wants to do that. Like, who wants to? No, I don't want to do that. Nobody wants to do that. So yeah. So let's talk about why here. And actually, we're gonna, just to prove my point a little bit further, we'll make this 0 milliseconds. So this is just immediately thereafter, next tick of the event loop. It doesn't matter. We're still going to get the act warning. Okay, so let's talk about why adding an async act around this user event click gets rid of this warning. First, let's make sure that it actually does. So we'll say await act. Oh, we're going to need to bring in act. And then and if we add await and async, I'm pretty sure this is basically what you were doing. Then the warning goes away. Okay, so now we've hopefully established we had a warning. Now the warning goes away when I add this async act. Now it will probably not go away if this is not async. If we just do a regular click, oh, here, let's get rid of that also. Then we're still going to get, no, we don't. Oh, yeah, man, it's really hard to demonstrate this because the timings are so finicky on when things happen. So if I were to increase this by a little bit, it all comes down to tick of the event loop. And yeah, even that didn't do it. Huh, that's interesting. This should not be happening at all. Hold on a second. Am I calling set timeout wrong? No. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. Coming back. So if let's make sure that our test runs to completion or runs long enough for us to see this problem. Sorry. Okay. So now we will see the warning. Whew. Okay. So yeah, I was just trying to establish that the act has to be async. Otherwise, we will see the problem. And also, this will need to be, we'll imagine that this is mocked out to just happen on the next tick of the event loop. And it looks like we're still seeing the error. Huh. Well, we should be still seeing the error, but I'm curious.
Maybe
why...
yeah. What I usually do is also wrapped in act, the other promise. Maybe that's what's causing the error.
Yeah. Well, that's basically, that is a way to solve it. Using the built-in.
Yeah, which is pretty ugly in my opinion. But
yeah. I'm not sure why, because normally this is sufficient to solve this problem, or to hide the problem. But yeah, I'm not sure why that's why it's not working there. But it doesn't make a difference because you shouldn't be doing this anyway. I'm just trying to explain why this sometimes will solve it. Okay. So we'll just talk it through. We'll just pretend that we don't see the error, and I'll explain why sometimes this does solve it. And again, this is why you shouldn't be doing this, because sometimes it doesn't solve it. So basically what happens when you make something async, as soon as that thing is async and you're awaiting it, that's going to schedule this thing to happen on a future tick of the event loop. Maybe if we were to set this to set immediate, that might change things. Yeah. So set immediate. So it all kind of depends on the ticks of the event loop, and you don't want your tests to care about that at all, which is why I've spent so much time making React testing libraries so you don't have to worry about ticks of the event loop. But anyway, that the reason that this seems to hide you from the problem is because as soon as you make any async function, it doesn't matter if it's like wrapping around user event, or if you're just doing this, it will be the same. Here, let's actually just grab this. We'll comment that out and we'll click on it. We won't wrap that in act, but we'll include this act, and the error should go away as well. So you remove the act, error is there, you add the act, and the error disappears. So it has nothing to do with the fact that you've wrapped user event.click. This is the thing that people don't understand, that I need to figure out a better way to communicate. You never, ever, period, end all be all, I will die before I admit otherwise. Okay, that's a little extreme. You do not need to wrap user event or fire event in act, period, ever. And the reason is actually quite simple. If we dive into the actual implementation of user event.click, then you'll notice that it's doing a whole bunch of things with fire event. And if we dive into here's fire event.click. So if we dive into fire event.click, oh great, well, we're gonna have to dive around a little bit. So we'll go into testing library DOM, we'll go to our events, fire event right here. The way that this is implemented, and this is all compiled code. We could look at the source code, but I think we've got enough from here. So if we look at fire event, the first thing that it does before it does anything else, eventually it's going to call dispatch event. That's all that fire event does, essentially. But before it does that, it's going to get the global configuration, and it's going to call this function called event wrapper. Now, I wonder what that event wrapper could be. Well, let's take a look at React testing library, and we'll look, oh, there's a fire event in React testing library. That's interesting. So we're going to import that. We're going to wrap fire event ourselves, and we're going to, oh, actually, no, it's not happening in here. That's going to happen in here. We've got our event wrapper right here. Okay. So that event wrapper that we were looking at, the thing that happens before fire event does anything is it's basically calling out, oh, I should look at the source code. It would be a lot easier to understand. But basically, React testing library, as soon as you bring that library into your project, or into the test file, it is already wrapping every single fire event call in act. It's doing this already for you. And so wrapping anything like user event or fire event inside of act is just putting it in another layer of act. So that's why you never need to do it, because it's already there. It already exists. You don't need to do it. It's already there. This is why I will go to my grave saying, this is the last thing I'll say. You didn't need to wrap it in act, and I will die. You don't need to wrap it in act ever. The fact is that just having an async act here, when you have something that's just scheduled for the next tick of the event loop, will say, oh, okay, so I'm going to wait for, however long it takes this promise to resolve, which is, the following tick of the event loop. And once that's done, or I'm going to say, hey, I'm scheduling some things to happen. Once that's done, then you can flush your use effects. And so when set count is called, we're still hanging out in this act. And so React is like, oh, you did have an act, so I will wait until that promise resolves, and then I will flush my stuff. And so technically, yes, we do have an act in place. It doesn't need to be around user event. The fact that it's put around user event is totally irrelevant. All that actually matters is that there is an act in place. Okay, so with all of that backdrop, what's the real way to solve this problem? The real way to solve this problem, because we don't want to rely on this at all. Like, what if this was a set timeout? And it was like a 15 millisecond timeout? We're going to get another error because this async act resolved before this had a chance to. So the real solution is to use another one of the React testing library utilities. So instead of calling act, let's just get that out of my face. You don't need to do this. Instead, you can use one of the built-in utilities like wait for, or even better, screen.findBy. So in our case, we wanted to expect the text to have been incremented. And so here we can just say await screen.findBy text, and we'll look for 1, and it'll just wait. And what this is going to do is it's using an async wrapper. So the wait for utility, upon which everything else is built, before it calls, or like it, yeah, well, let's just dive into it really quick. If we go into wait for async wrapper. So we have this wait for wrapper. That's actually what you're calling, is this wait for wrapper. And before it calls the underlying wait for implementation, it calls your async wrapper, which, where'd we go? Which we configure to be wrapped in act, in an async version of act. So you should never need to wrap any of the async utils in act either. And this applies just as well. So find by text uses wait for under the hood. So this is also going to be wrapped in act automatically for you. And that is why you don't need to wrap anything in act, like basically ever. They're just like 4 situations where you need to wrap them in act, and they're all well documented. There are even videos on that blog post to show you those situations. If you're ever wrapping anything else in act other than what's shown in those videos, it's really likely you don't have to do that. And yeah, and I would advise you find another way. Now, Horacio, what the video or the live stream you were watching, I was looking at an issue on user event from Amanda, which is now closed. And Amanda was insisting that you do need to wrap this in act when you use it in a before each. This is the exact same problem. So I never saw her actual code, like underlying implementation or anything, but my assumption is that when she clicked on, and actually one of the other maintainers mentioned this as well. Let's see. Yeah, so it's covering up some delayed state change. So once this click happens, there's some sort of delay, and then there's a state update that happens. And what's going on is we click on this, but before we even get into the next test, most likely, this other state change happens. So there's a little gap of time between your before each running and your actual test running. And this is one of the many reasons why I say you just don't use before each for this kind of thing. Just don't do it. Just put it in your test. And I shared some blog posts with Amanda. I'll share this in the Discord as well. Yeah, so you can take a look at some of those blog posts. But yeah, you never need ever like her problem that she was having could just as easily have been solved by adding a await act async and spelling it correctly. So like it would have been solved just as easily by putting it on the next line. And I probably should have mentioned that to her. I am going to share this video recording with her, but yeah, hopefully that sort of helps clarify for somebody out there. And I need to find a way to explain this particular thing better in that blog post. It's kind of a confusing thing to explain. I resent that we have to worry about this, honestly. And that's why I've worked so hard to make it so you don't have to worry about it. But there's only so much that I can do. So there you go. That's it.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot. I think that a lot of us struggle because like find by text helps when you want to check if somebody changed some text changes in the screen. But I was reviewing one of the tests that I was having that I was using in this particular like issue, and it was like it was a form that is using React hook form, which is originally async everything. So it was making things very like unstable on my test.
Mm-hmm.
And the other place that I did this was that when I wanted to check if a function has been called with a specific parameter,
Yeah.
which is the actual button that it was clicked. So yeah, what I ended up using was wait for and then inside the expectation. Yeah, as it is there.
Yep, just like that. Yep, you got it.
So thanks a
Yeah,
lot.
the real trick is when there's some side effect that happens that's not observable. Or like where things get really tricky is if you're trying to test that something doesn't happen. Like I want to make sure that this does not happen. And when that thing that shouldn't happen is async. And there's no built-in solution for this particular problem, but I answered somebody's question in the issues of like a week or two ago about this. And I actually ran into this myself a little bit ago. And now I'm going to have to do that same search that I did a week or two ago to find where I did this. I'm pretty sure it was in React testing library course. Yeah, it's in one of these. Yeah, let's just see. No, it's not in here. I can't remember where it was. But basically what you do is you say, yeah, it was await, or actually, yeah, this is what you do right there. And then you expect function not to have been called. So you just do an arbitrary time. I don't like doing this, but like, if you think about it, an end user is going to say, like if you're giving instructions to a manual tester, you're going to say, okay, click on this button, and then I want you to verify that no alert appears on the screen. If they're a really good manual tester, then they'll say, well, how long should I sit there and wait to know if the alert or to decide whether the alert is ever going to show up? You say, well, I mean, sometimes that alert takes like 20 minutes. So I'm going to need you to sit there for a half hour to be totally sure. And that would be ridiculous, right? But if that's what it was, that's what you'd say. And so they'd start a clock and they'd say, okay, now I'm going to wait for a half hour. And then I'm going to just keep on making sure that it's not there or never shows up or whatever. And so that's the solution. And of course, you're going to mock everything out. So it really does come down to maybe even like 10 milliseconds, assuming everything's mocked out properly. But But yeah, that's the most tricky thing, and that's the one I would say that's the one thing that is not built in that probably will get built in eventually, or should be potentially, because that, like, it's not a very common case, and it's not something that I typically encourage, which is why it's not built in yet, because I can't think of a good way to build it in and not have people just go crazy with, await, sleep, 100 or whatever, because they don't know how to how to use other utilities properly. This is the same thing with query by. It's honestly, query by is sort of a mistake. It was the first one. We didn't have get or find before query. Query came first. But yeah, like I see people using query by when they should be using get by, because it technically works, even if they would be better off using get by. So it's tricky to add things to a library when you know that it will be abused if you do. So, and then you're all of a sudden writing blog posts like this: common mistakes. I wish that you couldn't make these mistakes, but you can, and that's what it is. So anyway. Thanks for asking that question, Horacio. This was going to be a short office hours, but then you asked that question, and now it's a long one. Yago also helped with that, so thank you. Okay, cool. That's everything for this office hours, it looks like. So unless there are any last minute questions before I just wrap us up.
Yeah, I have one quick question. Let me share the code sandbox. So
oh, did you? Oh, yeah. Somebody, and Sebastian, I think you asked something here as well. I need to scroll up. Is this your question right here?
No. I'm the last one.
Oh, okay. There you are.
Okay. It just about when to use. It's not really specific to React, but it's really bugging me. So I find myself having to use arrays and then hash maps. For this example, the products and categories, or the products use categories, IDs. And then for categories, I might list them. So I have to keep them as an array to sort or to do other things. But to be able to render the products objects, I have to convert the list to a hash map. So is this a good approach, or am I missing something here?
I'm not sure I understand what you're going to do with this categories hash map.
Okay.
This is going to be an array of the
refresh.
IDs, right?
Could you refresh?
Yeah. So sorry, oh, okay, nice. Okay.
To be able to render the products, I have to access the category name, because I'm only saving the category ID in the products list. So to ease access, I have to convert it to hash map so I can have constant access.
Okay, so you want to be able to render the category by its name.
Yep.
And
then keep the list as it is. Imagine the categories is saved in context or somewhere. So I have to keep it as an array.
Here's what I would do. I wouldn't write it this way. Instead, I would say categories dot find, and I'd look for the category ID to be equal to the p dot category.
No, but I don't like this one. I might be I'm being performance freak here, but I just imagine I have a big list of products. So for each product, I have to loop through the categories to just
it wouldn't
find
be
the
performant if you have an enormous list of products.
Yeah.
And so, like, the way that I operate is I'm going to do it the way that makes the most sense to me. And then I will measure and see if there are any performance problems. And if I've identified a performance problem, then I will reach for the tool that solves that problem. And that's exactly what you did here. And that's what I would do.
So that there's no problem with saving the same data into data structures. So one for one
No,
use case and the other one for.
This is what I call derived state. And so, yeah, as long as you list the dependencies properly and everything, which it looks like you are, I'm not sure why either exclude it. Oh, it has an unnecessary. Oh.
Yeah, because it's constant. It's not.
Oh, right. Yeah. But normally you're going to get this from another state value or something. Yeah. Yeah. So this is derived state, and I wouldn't have any problem with that. And in fact, like if you wanted to improve things, but you didn't want to use memo, then you could actually, like, this is better than what I had. So this is a step up because you're not iterating for every single product. You're going to iterate through all these. So you could do it this way at first. And then once you decide, okay, like mapping these keys every single render is not great, so let's memoize this. So it's, you know, a progression. There's totally nothing wrong with this. This is actually what I encourage, and I've got a blog post about derived state where I encourage this sort of practice. So yeah, it's a good thing. Cool.
Okay,
does that answer your question?
Yep.
Very good. Okay, sweet. So let me just get these other questions that I skipped earlier. So Matt asked if I have any comments or opinions on using Xstate with Redux. So Matt, I haven't used Redux in many season, and I don't recommend it. I think that it is too easy to abuse. As far as using Redux with Xstate, I have very limited experience with Xstate, and it's been a long time since I've done Redux. So I can't really speak to it too much, but Xstate seems like a smart idea. And it seems like those two would probably work out okay. I don't know. I can't really say. But yeah, what I would suggest is use React Query for your query cache stuff, and then you can use Xstate for your UI. And I don't see any reason why you'd need Redux for that sort of thing. Yes, it would be great if we could get if we could get a video editor, that would be awesome. But in my experience, people who are doing that sort of work for free are amazing, do awesome work, but they just get burned out. And I don't want to burn anybody out. What would be the next level to that is if somebody wanted to just take timestamps and just make a comment on the video, then that would be even easier than doing an actual video editing experience and be just as valuable, basically, pretty much. Oh yeah, so Slim, let's talk about the test isolation. Yeah, so yeah, shoot, let me see. I can't remember where that was. I think it may have been in here. Yes, right here. Right, and here I say, what good is an isolated test if you lose confidence that things work together? So there's value in isolated tests. An isolated test allows you to, like, if that thing fails, you know exactly what caused the failure because it's just this one small thing. If you have a full test that includes like going to the bathroom and getting soda, you're not sure which part of all of that whole process is what triggered the failure. And so like the higher up the trophy you go, the less granular errors you're going to get. And that's the fact of the matter. But I feel like that our tools are pretty good at helping us identify what caused the failure. And even if they weren't, I'd actually be, I still value having a solid test suite of comprehensive tests that are maybe a little harder to debug over a huge suite of unit tests that don't give me confidence that things work together. And so in this specific case, Slim, I'm not at all really worried about the like whether or not the main component get re-rendered, like what harm is that going to do? Probably none. And it's going to give you more confidence. So that's, yeah, I wouldn't worry about the test not being isolated just for isolated sake. There's got to be a reason that including this in the test is a problem. And that reason can't just be, well, it's a couple milliseconds slower if I include it. That's not going to fly for me. I need it to be a more legit reason. So hopefully that answers your question, Slim. Feel free to interrupt me if it doesn't. You have further questions. You are in the Zoom call, so you get precedence over anybody else in here. Okay, so TL is asking, trying to replicate a version of the Bookshelf app, but I'd like to keep the state when changing routes. Okay. Yeah, okay. So Teo or Tio, or I'm sorry, don't know how to pronounce your name properly. So use React Query actually already is in a context and it's already stored globally. So the way the Bookshelf app works for that, here, that's, I think that's in the, no, Discover JS. Yep, here it is. So the way that this works is when, oh, here, hold on a second. Yeah, it's not the use query hook. Okay, yeah. So we're storing, what you care about is the query string or the query that we're passing, and we're storing that in the state of the book screen. And that's why when I navigate from one page to the next, and then try to go back, I've unmounted this Discover book screen and mounted a brand new one, which gets its query initialized to this. So it actually has nothing to do with React Query at all, and everything to do with where I'm storing this state. So if you wanted to be able to preserve this state across history transitions, what I would suggest is actually just totally remove this state from the component, and instead, anytime the query is updated, you actually update the URL. You do a navigation that is replace true, so it doesn't actually, well, maybe not replace true. You would want it to be in history. And you just update the URL. You play around with that replace true thing. Yeah, so you'd update the URL in place so that the URL has that state. And then this will trigger a re-render of our component, and we can get the query from the query params and then render that. So the source of truth for our query moves from our component to the URL. So then when you navigate to one page, you're going to render that page. But then if you go back, that query string will be in the URL and you can render it as it is. That's how I would solve that problem. That's a good feature idea. I think yeah, that's great. Would something like this be bad as well? So I don't think so. Oh, okay, here we go. We have hit component, user hit. No, this is totally fine. This is, some people call this component injection. There's this Hydra. This has never been anything that I've seen anybody else talk about other than Donovan West. But yeah, so he likes this pattern. Yeah, let's see. How does this work? Oh no, this was back with like render props and stuff. No. It is. I can't remember. I feel like this is related, but now I'm starting to forget. But yeah, this is basically, it's totally legit pattern. I don't really use it a whole lot myself. But yeah, you wouldn't be in any trouble doing this. What really matters is, when is this component defined? Is it defined in a render? Then that is not okay. You're going to end up with unmounted remount all the time. But if it's defined in like the root level of a module or something, or maybe even a higher order component, then yeah, it's totally fine. Okay, cool. So and make sure you debounce the set query. Oh, yes. Good point, Horacio. Good point. That way, like, and the reason for that, well, I don't know, maybe you're okay to not debounce it. Because actually what would probably be a better user experience is because we actually don't perform the search until we have clicked on search right here. So if you're updating the query as they're typing, then that's one thing. But the way that I make it work is we don't actually perform any search or even update the query until the user clicks on search. And so then you wouldn't need to bother with dispatch or debounce. But yes, good point.
Hey,
Okay.
Kent.
Yes.
I had Sebastian here. I had just a quick question. You said as long as the user hit component is not being defined on a render, I'm not 100% sure I understand what that means. What I can tell you a little bit of what I'm doing. So that user hit component is solely displaying information, doesn't have any state or anything like that. And the only thing I'm doing here is I'm importing that component into where I do have the implementation, the search provider that you see there. And all I'm doing is I'm passing it into the hit component and then using it as the so that it's rendering that component with the data from the hits component.
Yep, that's fine. Yep. If you're able to import it, then that means it's defined at the root level of a module. So the problem comes when it's defined within the render, or this is class like React class component vernacular, because you don't really have a render method anymore. But when I say that, I mean the body of your function component. So if you're defining it in the body of a function component, then that's where the problem comes, because you're making a brand new version of this component every render, which will trigger an unmount and a remount. But since you're just defining it and like importing it, that's fine. You have a stable version of this component, so it will work just fine.
Got it. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Follow up here from Teo or sorry. What about if I click on the discover link instead of back on the browser? Yeah, in that case, then I think that, yeah. Yeah, in that case, you'll want to put the query in context. Still has nothing to do with React query, but you just put this state into context and have this be restored through context. And it would need to be at least as global as the router, so that navigations don't unmount your context provider. That's all that you'd need to do there. Okay. Great. This has ended up being a pretty good time, even though we kind of started slow. So thanks for hanging out with me. Just to wrap things up, next office hours is on Monday. And then I'm, again, going to skip Thanksgiving in the US because I'm in the US, and we're going to have Thanksgiving all by ourselves because of the virus. So that's a thing. Yeah, the recording of this is going to be on the YouTube channel, so feel free to go check that out if you want to and share it with your friends. And with that, I'm going to peace out. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you in, oh, I just noticed the chat. Hold on. Oh, yeah, we're taking care of that. Okay, thanks, everybody. We'll see you all in the